exhibition of British art held here in Skopje in OSTEN Gallery. I'm going to give you a very quick tour of some of the highlights and special works in this exhibition, and I think it would be a good place to start with the earliest work in the exhibition, which is a woodcut by Ben Nicholson. There is a long tradition of woodcut prints in British art history, but in Ben Nicholson's case, he is dealing with international modernism. He was an artist who was connected with a great many European artists, particularly artists from Eastern Europe, during his formative years as an artist in London and in Cornwall, in the artists' colony of St Ives, where he spent time with Naum Garbo, for instance, and in London even with Piet Mondrian. So he was directly linked with European modernism and the influence of geometry, archaeology, and classical art. The classical white relief is clear in this work, which is as early as 1934. After the Second World War, the most important British artist to emerge was another close friend of Ben Nicholson, the sculptor Henry Moore. In contrast to the Ben Nicholson, this is a drawing by Henry Moore, a very delicate, although large-scale pencil drawing of bones. For Henry Moore, the link between the bones of landscape, by which I mean the geology of landscape, particularly the landscape of northern England, where he grew up, and the bones that form the human body was important. The symbiosis of stone and bone, the larger story of the way the world is formed, and the even more important story, perhaps to all of us, of how the human body is formed. He created a wonderful synergy and power, and I think probably that is the reason why in Britain he became such a well-loved artist eventually, after a lot of jokes were made about his human women with great big holes right in their middles. But eventually he became much loved, especially for his large-scale outdoor public pieces. But this is a wonderful intimate drawing to have in the collection. For some reason, sculpture became more important in Britain just after the Second World War than painting ever was. And there are two works over here by a contemporary, a younger contemporary of Henry Moore, the artist Lynn Chadwick. And here in this print, we see similar subject matter to Henry Moore, the human form, the king and queen in this case, but very angular, geometric, aggressive, not the rounded forms we associate with Henry Moore. And in that post-war world of people trying to regain their place after the catastrophe of the Second World War, this sort of angular sculpture became very much the mainstream. And the equivalent in paint was by the outstanding and individual painter Francis Bacon, a contemporary of Henry Moore, but in many ways his opposite. So here we have a drawing by Henry Moore that we've already looked at, where the bones are, I suppose, about life size, literally life size. The Bacon, however, is a version of the art that we associate with Francis Bacon. He was a painter who worked on a very, very large scale. So this print is a reminder only, almost a souvenir, of what it's like to stand in front of a Bacon triptych, So these are 3 separate canvases in real life, probably 2 meters high, and if you encounter them in a gallery, under the instruction of the artist, the 3 paintings will be close together, framed in bright gold, and with a very heavy, reflective glare on the glass, so that you or I see ourselves. He was an existential painter, a painter of nihilism and of great violence often, violent subject matter, and very, very intimate, private subject matter. The difference between Bacon and Moore is very obvious, but they were dealing with similar subjects at a similar time. Sculpture has gone on to be probably the most important art form in modern and contemporary British art, and one of the greatest examples of this, and this is a big leap in time, is Tony Cragg, who with other sculptors of his generation came to prominence in the early 1980s. I think one of the most interesting things to point out about Tony Cragg, whilst we stand in front of this work, apart from saying that materials, above all, is the subject that is the theme that fascinates that artist, is that he is an extremely significant British artist who has spent much of the last few decades working in Germany, but he is a crucial part of the British art scene, although a teacher based in another country. So I would like now to move slightly back in time, away from Tony Cragg, to somebody I'm linking with him because of his work as a teacher. That is Richard Hamilton, who in 1953, the year of the Queen's coronation, became a teacher in the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in the far north of England, almost Scotland. And he took with him the principles of Bauhaus teaching, basic design, and with the artist Victor Pasmore set up a revolutionary art department where students worked as much on exhibition design, poster design, and went out dancing, and to wonderful clothes shops. He was altogether somebody who was designing a way of life, and for that reason is known as the father of British pop art, although he was the first one to say that that baby could have had many, many, many fathers. He did not claim paternity at all. Hamilton was an artist who dealt with engineering, machines, product design. That was his aspect of pop. And whilst he was teaching in Newcastle, a whole new generation of younger artists were studying at the Royal College, David Hockney being one, and here, Peter Blake. Over there, Alan Jones, just a little younger again. And Peter Blake is a very different kind of pop art artist to Hamilton, a collector of images from popular culture, like Edoardo Paolozzi. They were far more influenced by the everyday cornflake packet or cigarette packet, whereas Hamilton gradually became much more interested in the concepts of Dada and Marcel Duchamp. That was his lasting, abiding interest. But it's worth pointing out that, as well as underlining the importance of art schools in Britain, that these two artists, Hamilton and Blake, both ended up doing a very pop thing, which was designing albums for the Beatles. The first concept album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the album cover was designed by Peter Blake. And for those of you who remember what an album cover is, Richard Hamilton went on to design, with Gordon House, an artist also in this collection, the seminal concept album, the White Album. So an interest in product design and popular culture defines pop art, and the later generation, who is well summed up here by Damien Hirst, took other definitions of pop art to a new level. Damien Hirst went as a student to another of the great art schools in London, Goldsmiths, and learned early on the value of marketing, of the brand, and of self-publicity. He organised an extremely important exhibition as a young man, an exhibition called Freeze, and went on to become extremely famous because of the clarity, simplicity, and sheer daring of his work. So this very simple pop-looking image is related to LSD and his famous Pickled Animal series. I think Damien Hirst would relate straight back to the work of an artist who he admired enormously, Francis Bacon, an artist who dealt with violence and the visceral side of human nature. So from the elegant classicism of Ben Nicholson and the use of circles in his work, you can turn to an artist who was working 50 years later, Damien Hirst. You can see similar shapes, a grid form and circles, but artists who are approaching the external world in a completely different manner.